And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jagai, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is Shane Kubis, contributor for Still Curtain. We've been spending a lot of time, Shane, talking about Pittsburgh's quarterback situation. We're going to take a break from that for now. I know how important it is to get this thing right, but we're going to focus our time on the NFL Combine coming up this week, the biggest pre-draft event of the season, of the offseason, I should say. And so we want to track where Mike Tomlin's going to be and Omar Khan, some of the things that Pittsburgh could be looking at. And so we're going to break down each day of the combine, some of our biggest things that we're going to be looking for. And then in the second part of the show, Shane, we're going to give the oddly specific things that Steelers fans should be looking for during the combine this year. Before we get to that, Shane, let's talk about some of the news happening recently here. Justin Fields had a kind of bizarre Instagram reaction. So it was like his manager posted this Instagram video of Fields. He was like hooping and hollering over something, like fist pumping. And as people are speculating that maybe this is like the precursor to a trade and he knows something that we don't know right now. Like, do you read into this at all, Shane, or is this nothing?
I mean, you never know with the way guys are on social media now. Like, sometimes they'll do stuff and then they'll wait for people to respond and then they'll come out and be like, well, you guys eat up everything. It's like, well, you did this for a reason. Like, I don't know what the reason is. It could be nothing. It could be him. Like, he could have just found something out that's completely unrelated to his future. He could, he could have been told like, hey, if you do get traded, we expect you'll be able to get this amount of money. Like, it could be anything, right? Like, that's the thing about this and stuff like this. It always kind of gets me is like, I try to just ignore a lot of it if I can, at least in terms of like trying to make it make sense in my head of like, oh, this could mean this, because it's futile. Like we've seen like George Pickens and his Instagram stuff or his whatever. It's like, it never ends up amounting to anything. Like, it's not like he got traded or he just refused to play. Like, none of that stuff happened. Right. So it to me, it's just, whatever happened, hopefully he was given a reaction because it was good for him. And that's all I can say.
Yeah, and I always have to question, like, all right, then why post it? Like, what are you reacting
You're doing it
right
for
now?
a reason.
Are you just trying to troll us here, or
maybe
what's
a little
going
bit,
on? But and then some people were speculating, like at the end, he had a comment. It wasn't a completely intelligible what you were hearing. We couldn't make out exactly, but it sounded like something to the tune of coming home. And so Justin Fields from Atlanta. Atlanta is. Yeah, I mean, Atlanta is really the other play besides or other team in play for a Justin Fields trade besides the Steelers. And so that would make a lot of sense if that were to be the case. Obviously, we haven't heard anything concrete at all this time, all just speculation. But I thought it's worth mentioning because of how tied the Steelers have been to a Justin Fields trade potentially.
For sure.
The odds obviously skyrocketed. It's also worth noting, Shane, those odds have been taken down now. So Justin Fields odds off the books. Does Vegas know something that we don't know? And so keep your eyes on that in the coming days, because something could happen really soon. And I kind of expect it to. I think the Bears kind of want to be done and past this situation. We know that he's going to be, he's going to be moved. Caleb Williams is going to be their quarterback, barring just some sort of like outstandingly huge trade package or something that they can't refuse. But I think that they're ready to move on, turn that page, get some draft capital, and then just start planning ahead. The Steelers, this is the same for all 32 teams, but the NFLPA report cards came out, and the Steelers have never really been overly friendly when it comes to this. This year was particularly bad. Like they gave ownership an F, 31st in the league. A couple other Fs on that report card. I have to go back and look at which the other ones were, but not exactly a glowing report. And if you don't know how this works, it's all the players that basically grade the organization, give them a letter grade A through F in terms of how they're doing and how they rank things like the cafeteria and facilities and weight room, a number of categories here. The Steelers did not grade out well. They graded out as one of the most poor organizations when it comes to this report card here. Do you read deeply into that? Is it because they shared the facility with the Pitt Panthers? Like where does this come from here?
I mean, if you look at the grades, it's primarily centered around two major things: a lack of funds being put into what a lot of people, like a lot of fans, might consider little things, but they're not little things to NFL players and teams. It's, the nutrition aspect. It's the amount of, space they have for strength conditioning, the workout rooms, family rooms, things like that. Like these little like extra things that people think about or don't think about, honestly, that the Steelers are just kind of behind on. And a lot of teams are. If you look at the report cards, a lot of teams falter in those areas, like the
Yeah.
environment for the players and their families, and the amount of, people that they have employed to help them with certain things. Like Rooney has kind of had a reputation of being cheap for a lot of time here now. Like Steelers routinely have one of the smaller, if not the smallest, coaching staffs. Like they don't employ a ton of extra guys to specialize on certain things, and I think that's what this is kind of looking at. Like you can say like, oh, he got an F grade, and it's not that Rooney's like a putrid owner necessarily. They're grading him on
Mhm.
these particular things, and whenever you grade poorly on funneling money into training rooms and locker rooms and that stuff, players aren't going to grade you highly. It doesn't mean any of them are going to say like, oh, I think Rooney should sell the team, but I do think they're not happy with the amount of effort and care being put into the details of things.
Yeah, I think that's very clear. And I do have the grades pulled up right here from Brooke Pryor. Treatment of facilities, F minus.
Yes,
The Steelers,
very much
the
not good
Steelers
there.
players give that. Food and cafeteria, B minus. Nutrition and dietitian, D. The locker room, an F.
Yeah.
Training room, D plus. Training staff, a C. Weight room, C. Strengths coach, B plus.
Yeah, they're happy with him.
Team travel, D. Head coach,
Yeah.
A. They all like Mike Tomlin.
Of course, we knew that.
And ownership in F. And so not very good overall, I would say, Shane. And especially you compare it to some of these other teams. Like I saw Miami's briefly. Like
Miami's
like
are just
across the
glistening.
board. So.
Yeah, they're glistening.
Yeah. So I think that changes do need to be made in facility. I know that a lot of fans will say, well, they're just being babies. Suck it up. You're making this much money. I understand that. But at the same time, in their mind, it's going to be like, well, I can go and play for this organization that does this much more for me. And treats us better in that regard. And so you kind of got to base it off of the other teams and not really.
You want to at least keep pace with what's normal around the league. I think that's the bar. Like, and there's people have been quoted as like one of the reasons why the Steelers ranks are low is because they don't do some of the stuff that is kind of normal around the league. And that's really all I think that they need to get to is like, let's just get up to par with the rest of the league. And that stuff will no longer be something that ever gets talked about, right? Like players aren't going to come out and say that, or they're not going to stress over that if it's just, what you expect it to be.
Yep, I agree. And I think that those changes have to be coming at some point, although there's some in the media that say there's just no room for those changes right now. As long as you share that facility with the Pitt Panthers football team, there's just not a lot of room for improvements, not the space for it. What have you. We'll see if anything becomes of this at all. It's not going to change contract situations, anything that way. I mean,
but
what they've got going for them is still what they have. So the Steelers met with some linebacker prospects. I want to talk about that really quick as the combine is getting started here. Obviously, defensive linemen, linebackers are the first group that will participate in drills starting tomorrow as we record this show on Wednesday. And Steelers did meet with some of the top linebacker prospects, Edgerrin Cooper of Texas A&M, Junior Colson of Michigan, and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. of Clemson. And so there's 3 of the top 4 or 5 linebackers in this draft. I mean, I don't want to read too deeply into combine visits. They're the least valuable of the big 3 categories, which is combine visits, pro day visits, and dinner meetings. And then the in-house pre-draft meetings as well. And so I would rank them 3rd in terms of importance there because you meet with so many guys at the combine.
It's pretty.
So we can't look too deeply into that. However, I will say though, it's about box checking. And so if a guy like Edgerrin Cooper gets another visit, if he gets the pro day meeting, Steelers are at Texas A&M's pro day, and he gets an in-house visit, I mean, that's the trifecta there. You're looking at all 3 boxes checked, which means that potentially one of these guys could be a first-round candidate. Now, I don't want to take a linebacker in the first round. I don't think that these guys are probably deserving of going with the 20th overall in this draft, but it's kind of doesn't matter what we think at the end of the day. We can give our opinions, obviously, and that's what we do is we give our opinions on what the Steelers do, and we can be hard on them at times, but it's something worth noting right now that at least they're looking at these guys and they're just doing their due diligence, I'm sure, with these linebackers. And maybe it's like a day 2 thing. Like if one of these guys fall, the value is right, then they'll pounce.
Yeah, and I think that's what you hope in the situation is. I think they clearly want to just be assured that linebacker is not going to be an issue like it was last year. Like if Holcomb is the guy, and he should be going into next year if he's healthy and his knee recovers well, you can't have a situation where it's Landon Roberts against the world again. Like as
Yeah.
well as he played and as admirably as he played, even in coverage at times, you cannot ask him to do it again. Like it's just not feasible. Like if he can, fantastic, but it's just not fair to him to ask him to be that type of player. It's just not who he is. If you want to use him to his best ability, he needs to be that second linebacker at worst. And for me, all these guys are day two players at this point. Like I don't think anyone is viewing these linebackers as first round prospects, and they shouldn't. If you're not a legitimately not just freak athlete but ready to play linebacker, you should not be drafted in the first round. There's so many cases of second, third, fourth round linebackers coming in and maybe getting off to a slow start because it's linebacker, but they turn into the Pro Bowlers, the All Pros. You know, outside of like Roquan Smith, right? Patrick Queen had a solid year too, but I think that's a lot to do with Roquan Smith. A lot of these guys that are getting into the top linebacker conversations are second round, third round picks. So if these guys go in the second round, if the Steelers want to go, target that position, I think especially Cooper and even Colson to a certain degree are both guys that I could see going in that range. I think they both have the skill set to do that. Cooper is kind of a hybrid guy for me where I think he could rush the passer a little bit, which is nice to have, but he's definitely more of an off-ball guy. Coverage was an issue for him prior to this year. I think he had a much better year in coverage this past year, if I remember correctly. So all these guys I think are definitely good players. It's just, again, how early are they willing to take them?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a good way to look at this, Shane, is look at the position around the league in general. Like, how many linebackers in the NFL would you trade a first round pick for?
Not many.
Fred Warner. And if it is Fred Warner, like that would be a very short list, like Warner, maybe Roquan Smith. But can you even stomach the double gut punch, which is giving up like a first round pick and going around turn and pay these guys $20 million? Now, if you look at a different position, like offensive tackle, like there are a dozen or so offensive tackles that you would do that deal for. But linebackers, they've got short shelf life. They don't hit very often in the first round. It's why there's only a couple good ones really in the league right now. And so it's just a bad investment these days. It feels kind of like the running back of the defense where you really don't want to invest this much draft capital in a position with a short shelf life, in one where you get banged up all the time. And when your hit rate is just not that good, like even a guy like Devin White hasn't really turned out. Like had a good year or two and that was about it. And you take the guy 5th overall. Like I just feel like in years where there were actually better linebacker prospects than this, and those guys went high, it's just hard to justify that selection most of the time when this position it's not as valuable as it has been in yesterday's game.
I think it's more important. Like it's only valuable if you're amazing. Like if you're not a legit tier 1 linebacker, tier 2 linebacker, everybody below those two tiers is probably relatively interchangeable. Like that's kind of the issue with it. It's almost kind of like the running back position where if you have a true difference maker at running back, it can be worth paying them a decent amount of money. But if you don't, oftentimes it isn't worth that because you can get enough of that production made up for by 2 or 3 guys who don't make $10 million or more. And it's very interesting that those positions have kind of turned into that same type of situation where, okay, like it's great to have good linebackers, but if you don't have a great one, you could probably get away with just continuing to draft good ones and hoping they work out for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with this, but I think that it is like, how big of an upgrade would you get over a Cole Holcomb or a Landon Roberts? And I feel like in a not particularly great linebacker class, I'd be much more willing to wait until the value is right. If it lines up somewhere like the 3rd-ish round and one of these guys is still on the board at that point, then I feel like you can take a swing. Other than that, money 5 positions, take the best players at the most important positions. That should be every team's philosophy. And this just doesn't happen to be a very good positional group and not a very important position in today's game right now, unless, like you said, you get one of those great guys. All right, Shane, the Steel Curtain podcast is running a deposit match promotion up to $100 for any new Sleeper Daily Fantasy user. Make sure you use code FANSIDED2 when signing up to receive your deposit match. Please remember to always game responsibly. Scan the QR code on the screen to see if you qualify. All right, let's give our 2024 NFL Combine preview, what to watch for on each day, whether you're a Steelers fan or otherwise. We're going to give you some things that you should be looking for. And I want to go each day at a time here, Shane. We'll kind of break this into sections. So the first day of the combine drills starts tomorrow. As we record this podcast, Thursday is defensive linemen and linebackers. They are already there. They're meeting. The meetings have begun. We don't have any weigh-in numbers yet. Did they do that in the mornings now? I always thought that they did that the day before.
I think they might be doing them in the mornings now because, if we haven't gotten them yet, we're not going to until they actually start working out, which that would make some sense, I guess, to do it that day, just so everybody can just be like, all right, it's going to just be part of my workout. I do it, get off, and then get ready to go on the field. But I haven't seen any weigh-ins yet, so I don't think
and
happening
I'm
today.
certain that I would have seen some of those circulating.
Oh, for sure.
around
The way
today
my notifications are on, I would.
They did make some changes, some minor changes this year. I know, so that might be one of them. Let's talk about these groups here for a second. We'll start with the defensive lineman, Shane. I think that defensive line is a need for Steelers. There's no question. You've got Cameron Hayward is going to be 35 years old early this offseason. Keanu Benton looks like he could be a stud, but outside of him, like there's not a lot of promising youth to look forward to. I actually wrote an article on DeMarvin Leal that's going to come out here soon, and why he's already on the hot seat. I mean, the guy was inactive for the last five of the last 6 games down the stretch, including the wild card game. So you can't really count on him as part of the future. Like outside of Benton, there's not a lot to look forward to here. It's just because the Steelers have so many other pressing needs. I don't know how willing or how early they would be willing to address the interior defensive line. My first initial thought here, Shane, is that they won't be willing to go there until like the 3rd or 4th round. Do you have a different idea on that?
I think that in general, I agree with that. I think what could happen potentially, because this interior defensive line class especially is pretty top heavy in terms of like the guys who are legitimate impacts like day one. How much do the other guys get bumped up? Like how much, just because of need, do those guys that are below them, do they get bumped up, or do they get pushed down for, better players at different spots? If they get pushed down, then if you see, some of the other guys that are like the tier 2 players behind the Murphys of the world and Johnny Newton, guys like that, if a player that's actually a very, very good player just makes it to 2nd round, right? Like maybe if it's like you're looking at a guy that, I like personally a lot, actually. Wanted to pull up his numbers here. He's a defensive tackle out of Florida State, Brandon Fisk. I really liked him at Senior Bowl. I thought he had a really good day. I thought he's had some really good seasons, especially his sophomore season was better than his junior season. But guys like that are in that 2nd round conversation, if one of them is sitting there and the board falls a certain way, I could see them addressing it just because they know that they need someone beyond Hayward, especially other than just obviously Benton. So I still think 3rd round is the earliest that they would go, though. Like you said, I just think there's too many other pressing needs. And it also matters how free agency goes. Like, do they decide to try to go pick up a defensive lineman that is going to be a 2 or 3 year answer, not just like a 1 year gap or something? If they do that, then it completely changes it. They might not even address it at all, but definitely not until later in the draft then.
Yeah, one of the issues I have with this particular defensive line group this year, Shane, is I don't think it's very strong at the top, which is okay because I don't expect Steelers to go there in the 1st round anyway. But I also don't know if it really features the type of defensive lineman that they need the most. The guys at the top here, they're all more of your undersized penetrating 3 techniques.
Yes.
Like the guys that are like 6'2", 300-ish pounds aren't very stout against the run, which is kind of what the Steelers need, that type of player.
Definitely.
So it limits your options a little bit here, because how many Larry Ogunjobis can you play on this defensive line at the same time? I think when you play what we saw last year, like when you play Ogunjobi and Montrevious Adams at the same time, it's a nightmare scenario because both of those guys, they can't anchor. And so we don't know if both or either will be on the roster this year. I know Adams is a free agent. Ogunjobi, something has to be done about his contract, I would think. I'm not okay with the cap number, quite frankly. I think that he was very underwhelming last year for the Steelers. But even if Ogunjobi comes back and you pair him with Keanu Benton, Cameron Hayward, you need something else. I just feel like they need something that is more stout than what they have on the team outside of really anybody besides maybe Hayward. And so I feel like there are a couple guys that fit that mold for the Steelers. And one of them is T'Vondre Sweat. I know that he's just a huge human being, and he didn't even want to weigh in at the Senior Bowl, if I recall. And I'm very interested to see what his numbers are going to be here. But he is a guy who can move a little bit for being as big as what he is. He can anchor against the run. He is just a kind of a one-dimensional player. He's not going to offer a lot else. But I think that the Steelers have kind of reached that point. They need that guy at this point because you just aren't getting enough run stop prowess that with what you've had over the last several years. So like in a perfect world, Shane, I would love to be able to have like that Stephon Tuitt type player to pair with Keanu Benton for this foreseeable future after Hayward is gone here. But I just don't know if that guy exists in this class. Like I really like Darius Robinson out of Missouri.
But he's probably going early.
He's going to fall between their first and second round picks. If I had to guess, second round becomes super intriguing there because you just don't get the guys that are like 6'5", roughly 300 pounds and just rocked up like that. And he's a really good run defender too. Doesn't really have a pass rush plan. But I thought he certainly flashed at the Senior Bowl. Yeah. And that frame is just so exceptionally rare. Like I think one of the rarest things that's so hard to find in today's NFL is that interior defender that is like 6'5 plus, 300 plus with long arms and is stout against the run and can offer you pass rush chops. Like there's only a handful of those guys in the game today. And most of these guys that are coming out are like the 6'2", 300 pound guys. And I feel like the Steelers, that's a little bit of a redundancy there. Obviously you can get an upgrade, you can get a big upgrade over Larry Ogunjobi, but they need to be able to kind of anchor against the run in their defense. And they just haven't been able to do that.
No. And you talked about like that type of player is probably the biggest need. Cause I think Benton ultimately is going to be better as an attacking, like penetrating player. I don't think he's going to be a true nose or even just a run defender primarily. I just want to see him use his juice that he has as a pass rusher more often. So I'd like to see him kind of basically take over for what Cam has been to this team for a while once Cam is done. A couple guys to keep in mind for like early day 3 or late day 2 for us as well. If you're looking for more of that like run stopping presence or just a bigger body, we're talking about Texas A&M. Could they show up at the pro day? McKinley Jackson is a good player.
Yes.
Out of those run defender type 6'2", 325. Like he's definitely one of the bigger players. You know, one guy that I've seen, like I watch a lot of Brett Coleman and his Bootleg Football podcast with EJ Snyder too. Like I know they talked to this guy, I believe it was at the Shrine Bowl, Christian Boyd out of UNI. Yeah. Absolute freak. Like just a freak of nature person. Like he looks insane. If you like stand next to him, they showed some pictures of them standing next to him, looks insane. Like he's a guy that because, you and I, and, maybe not viewed as like this, like rock solid prospect could end up getting a guy like that later. He's listed like 6'4", 317. Those types of players is who you probably want to target if you're the Steelers and hopefully a little bit later in the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. Logan Lee is another one. Yeah. There's several that fit that mold, but I like Christian Boyd. He wasn't invited to the combine even.
I know, and that's crazy to me. Here. I don't understand.
And I thought for sure that he would have been. Like he's certainly a top. They invited 321 players. Like he's probably like a top 175 player.
Oh, at least to me, at least like from what I've seen. Like I haven't seen a lot of them yet, but like just that frame and that body type and having like that type of ability that he showed even at UNI, like that guy is getting drafted relatively early for what, especially not being a combine invite.
Yeah, but I agree. I think that's kind of the mold that they're looking for there. The big kind of rocked up guys that can anchor against the run. And I'm hoping that's the way that they go because they've been trying. It's odd, Shane, because they've been trying to fit a square peg in a round hole when it comes to their nose tackles. Like they've been getting undersized nose tackles.
Yeah,
who really are more of pass rushers than they are anything else. Like Montrevious Adams wasn't a nose tackle, and you kind of have to go back. Like the last solid one they had that was actually good for that role was like a younger Tyson Alulu, and since then it's been rough at that.
I mean, even Hargrave when we picked him up in the draft, like he was undersized. When we tried to play him in nose tackle primarily, and I'm like, this guy is an interior like rush. Like this is not. This just isn't what he does. Like I don't know. They've been weird.
He's definitely more of the penetrating type, and I think that's why he's been even better since leaving the Steelers because there's schemes that are better for him than that. So
for sure.
Let's talk about the other group here performing on Thursday, and that is the linebackers. We talked about them a little bit, so I won't spend too much time here.
Yeah.
Is there anyone in particular that you want to see, and any numbers that you want to see? I know that I'm very interested to see like how Jeremiah Trotter does. Yeah. And you look, like it or not, the Steelers love family bloodlines. And you say about what you will, he is a second generation all-pro player, much like Joey Porter Jr. was. His dad was a former all-pro linebacker, played a long time for the Eagles and for Washington. And so I feel like that has to be one that we cannot rule out on day 2. Now, obviously, I like him better. Let's get a 3rd round guy rather than like in the 2nd round. We'll see how he performs here. But to me, I feel like he's a little bit more like in the Landon Roberts role. Like I want someone more complete than that. You're just not getting that really.
Yeah, there's a guy that I have no idea what to deal with in terms of like projecting him as far as when he'll get drafted. If there was a linebacker in this class that I would say is worth a 1st-round pick in a vacuum, right? It's Peyton Wilson out of NC State.
Yeah.
Just an absolute freak and 6'4", like full-size linebacker. Just a freak. Like he's going to test unbelievably, assuming he tests. Like I'm assuming he's testing. He's going to look insane. But the injury history is just so bad. And you have to wonder, like, can he just be on the field enough? And with Holcomb having injury last year, do you want to bring in a guy who might not play all the time? But it's difficult because when guys like this come in, I'm like, I want to believe that they're going to be all right. Like, I just want to believe in my heart that like they'll be fine. They'll get in the NFL, better coaching, better strength conditioning. They'll get it figured out, better doctors. But I don't know where he's going to get. Like, if he's sitting there at our 2nd-round pick, I'm gonna in the back of my head and be like, man, maybe you just take a shot because if he's healthy, he's probably the best linebacker in the team day 1. Like it's gonna be interesting with him. But he's a guy I'm definitely curious to see how he.
I agree. I think that Peyton Wilson could be really good if he can stay healthy, but that's a big if. It's kind of like the Corey Trice thing. It's
pretty
like,
much, yeah. It's just
and not to that extreme, but he is coming off of a really good year. But that's the thing is he's played less than like 2 full seasons in college so far, and he's going to be
despite being 24.
He's going to be a 24-year-old linebacker well before training camp, and so definitely an intriguing player though, and it makes me a little bit sad that that's not one of the linebackers the Steelers have met with so far, and maybe they will be scared off by the injury stuff because they dealt with so much of it this past year. You had to play guys like Michael Walker and Miles Jack coming out of retirement, so don't want to get in that situation again. Which I understand it's an important trait. To be healthy, it's just so hard to predict, and they might try to steer clear of guys with lengthy injury histories like that. Definitely some intriguing names there for sure, though. Let's move on from this group, Shane. Let's talk about Friday's group here, and that consists of defensive backs and tight ends. And kind of an odd pairing there with defensive backs with the tight ends, but the tight ends. Let's touch on that one first because I don't think that's going to be a huge need for the Steelers. Obviously, they have Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward under contract already. And I kind of feel like, Shane, if the Steelers get another tight end, it's going to be an Arthur Smith tight end.
You mean the recently released Jonnu Smith?
Jonnu Smith is on the market now. Somehow he's going to end up on the roster. Like that guy is going to be on the Pittsburgh Steelers because he's played 5 of 7 years with Arthur Smith so far in his NFL career. I don't know. That's just what it feels like to me. It's not a good tight end class either. I'm not very big. Like I love Brock Bowers. I'm interested to see where that guy goes. Obviously that's not going to go into the Steelers. But outside of that, the class is pretty weak overall, I think. And I just don't think that they kind of have one guy that offers a little bit of everything. I do feel like if they add to that, it's either going to be a veteran free agent or it's going to be like the H-back type that can play fullback and do more things for them. I'm interested to see if they use Connor Hayward in that way at all. And he might need to be more versatile to kind of stick around here and carve out a role, because if they were to add another veteran, I can see his role kind of just going back to being like a special teams player. And he played a good bit of snaps for the Steelers last year, but what do you make of the tight end situation this year? Do you think that Steelers will spend one of their 7 draft picks on a tight end?
I hope not, because if they do, then that means that probably they're not super happy with current situation. And I think they should be, right? So what it comes down to is there's tight ends down the board that I think would be a good schematic fit, but I just don't think they need it, right? Like it just comes down to, if you don't like the group you have, then either you probably just are wrong about that, in my opinion, just looking at it, or you want something that somehow none of these 3 guys provide, which I don't really know what they don't provide in some way, shape, or form. Like you have Washington for blocking, Hayward is a Swiss Army knife, and Pat is the receiver, right? Like if you need more than that, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you on that one. So like, especially because again, you're probably just going to bring in Jonnu Smith to be the guy who throws the ball in the red zone or whatever he did last year. I don't know what that was about. Like, I don't know. It feels like if they do spend a pick on this, it just means something bad for one of the other guys.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of film already in this draft cycle. I have not watched a ton of the tight end film outside of the top several guys here,
Yeah.
but just from everything I'm hearing, it's just not a very strong class overall. And I feel like there's so many ways that you could spend those resources this year. I feel like
Yeah.
tight end, like maybe outside of like edge defenders, like the most like locked up group that you have right now. And I think that Darnell Washington obviously could make a big improvement in year
I think he
two. He was a
will
very
too in
raw
this
player
scheme.
when drafted. I think he'll fit Arthur Smith's scheme. But I don't feel the need to spend the resources there. But I mean, maybe later on we'll have some guys that we want to talk about here. I just don't really have any right now. Defensive backs, that's a different story. I feel like we could
Huge.
talk for days about defensive backs because the Steelers have so many needs in their secondary. You need a starting right cornerback opposite of Joey Porter. You need a slot cornerback. You need a safety. And so I feel like, obviously, if you start at the top here, Shane, these first round candidates, I think you're looking at a handful of cornerbacks here, and for good reason. I think that there's a very solid chance the Steelers could go here in the first round. There's some guys that I like quite a bit. I still probably would favor the offensive tackles ahead of the combine, at least. Just I feel like the positional value and everything else. But there are some good cornerbacks that will be deserving of going by that 20th pick. Cooper DeJean, Nate Wiggins, Quinyon Mitchell, Terrion Arnold. And so there's a bunch of guys that could potentially fit with what they want to do there. Others, some fit better than others. And one of them I want to talk about in our next segment here. But what do you make of this cornerback group in particular, Shane, and what kind of things are you looking for here?
I think for me, like, and you kind of talked about with the corners versus tackle at our first pick, right? I think we feel at this point pretty confident that I shouldn't say just tackle, but offensive line or corner is very likely going to be the first pick that we make.
Yeah.
That just feels like, not guarantee, obviously, but feels very good to say that.
Mm.
I think it matters which one has a run before 20, because I think there's going to be a run on either tackles or corners ahead of us to the point where there might be a situation where, okay, the third best tackle or the fourth best tackle's there, but the sixth best corner's there, or the sixth best tackle's there, the fourth best corner. Like, so for me, I think it's more so about what the quality of the players are at that point. If the corners haven't gone fully yet, and you're looking at taking like a JC Latham at pick 20 instead of like a Mims or someone that I'm a little bit higher on, I'm going to take the swing at the corner, because as much as we need tackle help, we cannot allow Joey Porter Jr. to go out there and play corner by himself next year. Like, you can't do it. Doesn't mean that they will do that they could look at free agency. That could impact things. Maybe if they attack that in free agency, they don't even consider it at 20 anyway. Or maybe they go after a tackle that can play for a year or two and don't look at it, 20 for that reason either. Like, but all I know is you cannot allow Joey Porter to play corner by himself. And as much as I would hate to see Dan Moore have to go trot back out there, somehow I think that's still better than our second corner. So like, I feel like corner is more of a possibility than some of us might want to believe. And if it's the case, it just comes down to who's there.
Yeah, I definitely get that argument for sure. I do worry with corners a little bit just because the bust rate is high in the first round. They are high variance, but
admittedly, that's kind of part of it too.
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
them a lot.
Well, I mean, they're also very high variance from year to year. Like even some of the best corners, they can have really down seasons in the NFL. Where I feel like tackles, once you're established, you're pretty stable
mostly
overall,
good, typically, yeah. Especially
as long as you stay healthy. But yeah, it is an interesting debate there. I think it's one that will continue throughout the pre-draft process here. Are there any corners that you like later on in the draft, or any that you want to scout in particular? The one guy that I'm actually really intrigued by to be like a slot corner for the Steelers is Mike Sandstrel.
Oh yeah,
out of Michigan. He had great ball production. He's super physical. He seems like he would be a perfect fit with Terrell Austin and what Mike Tomlin want to do on defense there. Now you probably have to get that guy on day 2, I'm sure. And so I just don't know how high you're going to be willing to draft a slot guy when you have such a big need for a boundary cornerback. And that's when it kind of comes down to.
Yeah, for me, you look at a couple guys later so like TJ Tampa's one that I don't know where he's going to go. I think it's possible he could end up falling in the second round to us. I also feel like he could end up going at the very end of the first, early second. I think teams are going to be a little bit split on him because he's super athletic, but he doesn't have a lot of press experience, even though he is more of that press build. So you wonder, like, okay, is he going to just not do that as much? You're going to go to a scheme where maybe he doesn't do that as often as you'd expect a player with his skill set to have. So he's a little bit interesting. Renardo Green, that guy, if you have not watched him yet, he's about as physically imposing as a 6 foot, 185-pound man can be. Like, he just impressed, especially. I don't know if he's going to be able to do a lot else at a high level in the NFL, but if you just ask him to go up in the face of a receiver and basically make his day impossible, he could probably do that pretty fast. Like, if the LSU tape against Malik Neighbors, unbelievable. Just like completely took him out of the game, was completely useless whenever he was on him. It was pretty awesome to watch because I was watching Neighbors tape a while back whenever I was getting into this class, and I was like, man, this corner for FSU is really giving him a hard time in this game. And then I went back, I'm like, oh, it's Renardo Green. And he's ranked all over the place. I have a hard time thinking if he doesn't test well that he doesn't go in the second round. So, like, he's another guy that could be a possible second rounder for us. But down the board, like you talked about, Sarah, so I think he is going to be a day 2 guy, probably relatively early day 2 guy, at least compared to most slot corners. I know that you know this, and I'll throw it out there. I am writing for Penn State site right now, and I was doing some work on their corners. A late day 3 probably prospect that could end up being a slot corner, Daquan Hardy. Tough slot corner. You might want to check him out. Punt return value as well. Had 2 punt return touchdowns this past year. Special teams value. Could be a special teamer right away. And I do think he has the athletic ability to run with guys out of the slot, even the faster guys that might line up in the slot. So just wanted to throw his name out there too. Definitely fun player to watch too.
Yeah, I have not watched Hardy. I'll have to get into some of his tape.
Yeah,
I have watched. I've gone through like it was a pretty deep tape for like the first 8 to 10 corners in this draft.
Yeah,
so I think what'll be
yeah.
What'll be interesting, I think, Shane, is which of these guys fall to the second round and which of them make it all the way back to Pittsburgh's second round pick. Like,
it's tough.
Khalid McKinstry, I can't imagine would.
No, I
but
think
then you have like
late.
You've got Ennis Rakesaw Jr., TJ Tampa, Kamari Lassiter. Like, there's a decent group of guys right there that I feel like that they could potentially pounce on if the price is right in the second round. But I think the biggest thing to watch in terms of actual what's going to happen here at the combine, which of these guys can separate each other? Like, which of them is going to run a blazing 40? How are they going to measure in terms of like arm length and everything that way? How are they going to look in terms of fluidity in these drills? I think that these cornerbacks, like the first 5 cornerbacks, are close enough that this order can flip flop in kind of any which direction here. So I would expect Terrion Arnold to be the one off the board first. If I had to just make
he had an unbelievable season. His tools are just ridiculous. Yeah, it's going to be hard to
check every box. Just being the Alabama guy in grading out super well this year, and so be a redshirt sophomore is all. But I think that it'll be very interesting to see how these cornerbacks look, because this is a very real possibility for the Steelers. And even if you're getting, I don't always agree with this, but like if you're getting the 4th or 5th best corner in this draft, you can very much make a case that's still worth the 20th pick. You go back to like 2016, probably. You do it for Artie Burns. Awful decision.
Not so much. But, maybe not. Yeah, maybe don't do that.
But there are certain classes that line up like this, and I'm going to have a lot of either first round grades or 1-2 grades on these guys. And I only give out so many first round grades. So the chances are the Steelers aren't going to get a first round grade. I typically give out like 8 to 12 of those a year, and picking at 20 means you're probably not getting one. But if you can even get a 1-2 graded guy, that could be still best case scenario for what you're looking at that spot. So I'll be interested to see which of these guys are going to do something. Obviously, Cooper DeJean is not going to be doing the testing stuff for that injury
he's got
at the end of the season.
Yeah.
So, but the other ones, keep an eye on those, and we'll see what happens there. Any chats or anything you want to get to, Shane?
We had a couple just talking about, I know, of course, our Barley 18 loves to chime in here. I heard Boyd is down to 310-ish. Christian Boyd, I'm assuming he's talking about earlier. And then I think anything before mid-3 for inside linebacker is insane, with the inability to use a nose tackle and fondness of the 3 safety sets. Yeah, so you think Williams would be a fit. Okay, I think with McKin, which Williams were we thinking about there? I forget. I don't remember. Point is, I think he's I think in that case though, if you take an inside linebacker early in the 3rd round, it's only because one of those guys falls too far. Like the value is just too good. But I still think it's probably a 3rd round or later fit if they're going to do it.
Yeah, yep, and that's what I'm hoping for as well. And they just seems like they have too many other needs. You can get by with Holcomb, albeit after
if he's
an ACL
healthy,
injury.
If he's healthy,
and Roberts, and they could add another free agent, but I definitely expect them to draft one. I just don't know where exactly. And good comments there. If you guys got any questions for us, drop them in here in the live chat. Shane and I would love to get to those. Let's move to Saturday here, Shane, of the Combine and some of the things that we're going to be watching for. Saturday's always like, this is the fun day here. The quarterbacks, receivers, running backs, everybody wants to do it, whether you need one or not. You like watching this day just to see how all these guys perform. I'm a big fan of this quarterback class. I'm a big fan of this receiver class. Not a big fan of the running back class. That kind of works out in the Pittsburgh's favor because they don't need a running back. Correct. You got Najee and Warren both under contract. And like we said on the last pod, there wasn't a running back that touched the ball for the Steelers outside of those two guys last year.
Which is
so
probably not going to happen again, but if they could do it, they would. If
they can, if you can avoid the injury bug once again, then I'm perfectly fine with not taking one this year, unless you're taking like a late round guy with just like a spark athlete or something that way. Let's start with the quarterbacks here, Shane. I know that it's probably not as big as you can say Pittsburgh's need potentially is at quarterback. And when you look at this outlook, you look at the AFC in general, Shane, you go across division by division in the AFC, you could make a case. There's a chance Steelers could end up with the worst quarterback situation in the AFC this year. Maybe Steelers, Raiders, Broncos. I mean, that's the tier that they're in right now. Having said that, I don't know if they're willing to give up on Pickett. I think if they do something else, it's probably likely to go the free agent route or maybe even the trade route to get or that stopgap option in their current state. But I don't think that we could rule it out either. And I'm interested to see how Mike Tomlin kind of used these visits as well here at the Combine. Does he meet with a Spencer Rattler? Does he meet with a Michael Penix? Like, that will be telling, because I feel like you've got every opportunity to do that down here in Indianapolis. And so if you don't do that, it probably tells you that there's not a ton of interest in going that route. Maybe they still get like the in-house visit, but I am very interested to see what happens, particularly like with these day two quarterbacks here. And Rattler's one in particular that I would be kind of interested in to see if he would be like, if the Steelers would take a flyer on him, like third round, maybe they would trade up a little bit in the third round to go get that guy if he's still on the board there. Is there anybody that strikes you as interesting from this group, Shane, that you think could potentially be in connection with the Steelers?
So I'm going to throw something out there that I don't even want to put out in the world because I think it's just not the right fit for him and for the team, because it's not, I don't think it's enough of like a jump to take this guy at the 20th pick. But if he doesn't go even earlier than this, which I think is actually very likely too, I could see the Steelers liking Bo Nix a lot.
Yeah.
Just because he's a good athlete. He can make most of the throws you expect for a quarterback to make. He's very accurate. He has a little bit of that Auburn still in him where he can make plays out of structure, run around, do some stuff. He's a better prospect than Pickett was by a decent amount for me. I do have him as like a late first, early second type of player, which is a little bit higher than I know you had Pickett too. But with a team that's still missing a lot of key foundational pieces, tackle, corner, even center is not necessarily a foundational piece, but like a big part of, your quarterback situation. You want to have a guy who can handle that stuff at the center position. I don't think it's worth taking him because you can get other better players there, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was a fan, like if Tomlin and Colin were fans of his game.
Yeah, Shane, there was a little birdie told me that there are people inside the Steelers organization that have Nix as their top quarterback. And because he had such a great senior season here at Oregon, he had the lowest turnover worthy play rate in the country, combined with one of the largest big play rates in the country. And so Tomlin does not like to turn the ball over.
Nope.
Nix had 3 interceptions to go with 51 total touchdowns. And of those 3 interceptions, one of them bounced right off the chest of a wide receiver and into the hands of the defender. So really only 2 picks on the season with a really low turnover worthy play rate. Now I get exactly what you're saying. I do think there might be some interest here on the part of the Steelers, but when we look at it like that, let's look at the AFC as a whole. Like, does Bo Nix move the needle enough? I think he could be better than Pickett. I like the traits better than Pickett. Too. I don't think that would be an extremely high bar to clear. But when you compare him to Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Justin Herbert and all these guys, I mean, CJ Stroud now, like, does he even match any of these guys in the AFC, especially being like a sub 6'2" quarterback, which worries me a little bit too. Anytime you come under that 6'2" threshold, that's always a little bit concerning because I feel like that's like the baseline. Like, you typically don't want to go below that. even like Baker
Plus, you have
Mayfield
if
just
you have
literally said, I
insane,
can't see over the line.
yeah. If
So,
you have great physical tools and you can
uh
you mask that issue, then it doesn't matter as much. But I don't know if Nix is that level of player
yeah.
where you can mask some of that. So I agree with that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, keep an eye on that though, because if he gets the visits, that's what's going to matter at the end
Yep.
of the day. And so,
It'll make it
if we
possible.
see that kind of stuff happen, we cannot rule it out. He will be a prospect at least, and I don't know if the Steelers would be willing to like jump up for a quarterback or anything, but
Right.
he'll
But if
be
he
on their
falls
radar.
there, it's something we'll have to talk
It's
about.
possible. Let's talk about the wide receivers here. We
Yes.
brushed on running backs a little bit, and we're going to skip over that because there's really, I mean, I kind of don't see
I
them
don't
doing
even know who
anything
to
there.
talk about in that situation because I don't even know what
Receivers, though, different story, Shane. This is a great receiver class. I'm really, really fond of this group of receivers here. And I think on day 2, you can get an excellent starting football player for your team. There's a couple guys that I really like here, and I think Tomlin's going to like as well. Lad McConkey from Georgia is one of them. I think he would be the perfect kind of understudy to be a slot receiver right now, and Deontay Johnson's replacement in 2025. I just don't see Johnson coming back. I don't see the Steelers giving him a third contract. Now, maybe you do on a franchise tag, but are they going to be willing to throw like $20 million at him following this season? Is he going to fit with Arthur Smith's offense? Is he going to block? Because if he doesn't block, the coaching staff's not going to like him a lot. So I feel like it's probably to that point now, and Johnson is a solid player, but it's probably to that point where you need to start thinking about grooming his replacement here. I think McConkey is a super kind of underrated guy, and maybe he won't be underrated by the end of this process. I know some people are really high on him, but he runs terrific routes. He's excellent after the catch. He's got burst. He can get to full speed instantly. I like the total package that he offers there. I thought he had an awesome Senior Bowl week where you just could not stick with him, and running those whip routes and stuff was silly in terms of what he did to defensive backs. The other one that I think Tomlin is going to like is Roman Wilson, the Michigan wide receiver. Obviously, Tomlin likes both of these schools, drafted 2 Georgia guys in the top 3 rounds last year. Michigan's been one of his staples as well. Roman Wilson is kind of a rocked up, kind of compact receiver, but he's got juice to his game. He can run after the catch. Doesn't have like a huge route tree or anything right now. I think a lot of it has to do with Michigan just running the football so much, but he's a willing blocker and just a really physical dude. So I think that one makes sense too. I think both of those guys have to be round 2 picks though. So it's kind of dependent on like the free agency outlook, like what positions are secure enough that you can afford to go the receiver route at that point.
Yeah, I personally think McConkey doesn't make it past the Panthers at 33. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah,
because you think about it, like one, I think the Chiefs would love him. I think he's in play for them at 32 personally, depending on how the receiver board falls.
Mm-hmm.
What do the Panthers need more than anything on the planet Earth right now? Someone who's going to get open for Bryce Young relatively early into the play, because that certainly did not happen very often for him as a rookie with his receivers.
Yeah,
there's not many players that I can imagine being on the board still 33 that better personify just get open, make it stuff happen than McConkey at that point. So to me, I have a hard time thinking he makes it past him. Now, obviously, the league is weird. Sometimes they might just look at him and be like, look at his name. Like, that could totally happen. So like he could end up falling farther than he should. But I think he's legitimately worth that type of selection. So that's possible. Wilson, even like. The problem with the receiver class is like once you get past the top like 4 guys, 3 or 4 guys, how early are some of these other guys going to come off the board? Because the talent is there for them to all go in like the end of first, second, third round, but they can't all go in those spots, right? Because there's other players that need to get picked too. So like if a Wilson falls all the way to our pick in the second round, should probably happen, but might not. He could even fall further than that. It depends on what teams are looking at, what type of skill sets are looking for. I think he'd be a great fit as a third receiver and could take over as the number 2 receiver. Like you said, once Deontay would probably be gone. A guy like Ricky Pearsall Jr. out of Florida had an awesome Senior Bowl week. A little bit of an older prospect. He'll be close to 24 on draft day, but still a really good player. He has some slot experience. He could be kind of that slot guy early on too. Like a lot of options here if the Steelers want to attack the position.
Yeah, it's just a really deep group, and I kind of don't want them to miss out on this because
I
feel
don't,
like
because there's a lot of good players.
You don't always get starting receivers on day 2 of the draft. I feel like if you compare it to like last year's draft with like Jackson Smith-Njigba, some of those guys like Quentin Johnson, like I feel like if you take away like the top 3 receivers this class, it still might be as strong or maybe even deeper and better than last year's class was. Like obviously Puka Nacua turned out to be
Puka's
awesome.
great.
We
Downs was
didn't
really
see
good
that
for
coming.
Cole,
Nobody did,
guys like that, but still.
But yeah, there are some really, really quality day 2 receivers here.
For
I even
sure.
where's like an Adonai Mitchell going to go? Like that type of player.
I could see him going anywhere after like pick like 25 through like 50. It just depends because he's
So
kind of
I've
got
got a
some
hunch,
stuff about
Shane,
him.
because there are so many of them. I know there can be a run on them at any point,
Right?
but I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a guy sitting there at the receiver position when Steelers are on the clock with the second round. And I'm like, this guy has
Like you have to
tremendous
take him
value
almost.
still.
Yeah, like you almost have
So,
to take him.
so that's why I think free agency, ideally, I want them to cover all their bases, get like a center that you feel comfortable with, that kind of thing, so that you're not pigeonholed to going in a certain spot,
right?
Especially when the value lines up and you can get guys at really important positions like wide receiver and find great value there as well. Any other players that you want to talk about
right now? No, I think we definitely need to get on to offensive linemen.
Yeah. Let's move on. Let's move on to Sunday here and just the offensive linemen. I know it kind of feels like a boring group here. It's like, who's going to turn in to just watch the big guys here on Sunday? But
that would be me.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Shane, I actually thoroughly enjoy watching. This might be my favorite positional group to watch at the combine because I think you can tell so much from these guys. Like when it comes to like their kick slide, their movement drills, like you have to see these guys. How do they move? Because I think those are some very telling things. I still remember watching guys like Andres Pete and Eric Flowers. They went in the first round. Like these guys are so lumbering. And to take a phrase from my uncle, he used to call these guys heavy-legged waist benders. I'm like, that's exactly what they are. And so you like to see how these guys move out here. And I think that's going to be really important. There's somebody in particular I want to talk about when it comes to that here. But let's look at the group as a whole. And let's kind of start with like the centers here. I know everybody loves Jackson Powers Johnson. That's a fan favorite. Everybody knows who he is at this point after dominating the Senior Bowl. Steelers obviously have a massive need for center. They cut Mason Cole. There's like nobody on the roster right now. And so it's so easy to just kind of like pencil him in. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Now, what I would question there, Shane, and what I want to see, is he a good enough fit for what they want to do, for what Arthur Smith wants to do? And unfortunately, those types of things matter to coaches. Like, do they think he can move well enough laterally to be that guy? There are a few other prospects, Zach Frazier, Graham Barton, who was a left tackle for Duke, but projects as either a guard or center in the NFL. There are some quality players here that you can get in the first couple rounds.
Yeah, and I think as far as Jackson Powers Johnson goes, I think he can do everything personally. I don't think that there's a scheme that he could plug into and it's like, man, he's not going to be as good now. Like, I just don't think so. Not with a guy who has guard center flexibility. Like, typically, if you're a guy who can do both of those things, I have a hard time thinking you're not going to do well in most games just because you have to be so fluid in your movements to be able to do the pulling and everything else you have to do as a guard, some of the harder blocks as a guard, and also being able to play center. Like, if you take him at 20, I'm very confident he's going to be a Pro Bowl level player for you for a decade. Like, I just think that's the case with him. Now, is that going to mean that he's the best player to pick at 20? No. But I think that it's totally possible he could be the best player on the board for them at that point. So I don't want to roll that out. But I do think Zach Frazier is also a very good player, of course. I think he is a really good scheme fit as well for what they want to do with Arthur Smith. Some of the other guys, like, past that, I'm not a huge Van Pran guy. Out of Georgia, Cedric Van Pran. Like, I'm not a huge. Like, I think he's a good center prospect in a class that's better than average for center, but I don't think it's anything that's going to be like this day one starting player that's going to make an impact as a center. I think he'd just be good enough. Not to stay on the Penn State train again, just because I have been watching these guys for combine profiles I've been doing, but they have a center that could be drafted late that I actually think is a pretty solid player and might be able to plug and play and kind of be at least an average player. And Hunter Norzad is his name, a 6-year player, actually was at Cornell first as a tackle for several years before transitioning to Penn State and guard and center. So he's a guy that's versatility. Like, if you do get a center in free agency and you want to just take a flyer on somebody who could eventually replace that guy, he'd be a fun get. But it just, the center class is really good, but it's also like, if you don't take one of the top guys, you probably just shouldn't take one until very late.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see because it really comes down to those top 3 guys. If you're looking for like that plug and play starter, you're talking about Jackson Powers Johnson, Zach Frazier, or Graham Barton, who
Really,
projects inside at the
three,
next level. And we do have measurement numbers on JPJ here from the Senior Bowl, so we know that his size is perfect. I mean,
he's
over
playing
6'3",
big.
335 pounds. So Frazier, I'm interested to see what he comes in as Barton as well. And the arm length doesn't matter as much when you're in the interior anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. But
Right, but it'd be interesting to see
if these guys.
If he's long still for center. That's something to think about.
It is for sure, and I think that where these numbers really come into play for this offensive tackle, for the offensive tackle position, I feel like this is a close group here. A bunch of guys kind of all in that same range. How will they separate themselves? Who will come in like with some freakish traits like Amarius Mims? How long are his arms going to be? Like he looks the part for sure. I think some of those things can help kind of separate, because you can make up for some deficiencies and foot quickness, that kind of things. If you have exceptional traits, kind of like Dawan Jones did. And Dawan Jones was not a good athlete, good athlete in respect to his size, but not a good athlete in compared to starting NFL tackles. But he's just so long and so strong that it kind of didn't matter, especially in pass protection when he was healthy. So I think that those are some things to look for. Arm length, wingspan, huge for offensive tackles. Like you really, like my threshold, not that I get to make the decision anyway, I really look for at least that 34-inch arm mark. Like
most teams do. 34.
Anything under that, it becomes a little bit concerning. And that's why I was not the biggest Peter Skoronski fan last year, just too far under that threshold for me to feel comfortable about him as an actual tackle. And so I kind of projected him as on the inside at the next level. Any of the tackles that you are excited to watch this week?
For me, it's Amarius Mims. He's a guy that we just don't have a lot of tape on, right? And I think that's why it's so important for this type of event is perfect for players like him, where there isn't a lot of film on them. They've had injury stuff. They've had just being at Georgia, which means you don't play early a lot of the offensive line because they have a million guys coming in every year. And because of the lack of tape, like the tape that's out there, I think is definitely very good. It's just, again, you don't have as much information on him as that you would like to have. So if he comes into the combine and he tests very well for his size, if he's long and he's strong, if he looks fluid in drills and he's doing all these things, that's going to just kind of confirm what I already think about him, which is, honestly, I think he's probably, if not the most talented physical specimen at the tackle spot, it's probably Guyton. Like, I think those two are the most physically gifted here. Alt's really, really good. Fashion's really great athlete. Like, all these top guys, especially outside of like maybe Latham and Fuaga's kind of, I don't know, I'll have to see about him, but all these guys are really good athletes at the position. He probably outside of Guyton is the best though. And that's why like he's an interesting fit, because I would like him to be the tackle pick at 20 if the guys that I expect are to be gone are gone. Like that's just kind of where I'm at with it. Seeing him do well in drills would be really nice to see for me.
Yeah, he's such a polarizing prospect and very different than Broderick Jones, but it's similar in some ways because Broderick Jones looked so smooth and so good at the combine. It's like, you can see all the upside in this guy. Obviously, Mims is a much bigger player than Jones and very different. He's really probably that right tackle only in the NFL, which is fine because the Steelers could move Broderick back.
That's what I want to have happen anyway. So
So, and I do want to touch on him again. We're going to do some quick hitters here, and we will go through these pretty fast because we're already an hour into this thing. But if you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you'd like to support the Steel Curtain Podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. We're almost at that 500 mark here, so please help us get there. And if you enjoy what you're listening to, please tell family and friends about it. All right, Shane, let's talk about the oddly specific things to look for now at the NFL Combine this week. And let's start with Amarius Mims. The one thing that I want to see from him, I don't question his size, his length, like all that looks so good. Just watching him on film, I'm confident that he's going to look good there. I'm confident he's going to look strong. The biggest thing for me when I watch him is that kick slide.
Yeah.
It's a little bit lumbering, which is to be expected when you're that big. It's not like the most fluid out of that stance. I want to see how he looks in respect to all these guys. And what's cool about the combine is you get to watch them literally back to back to back. Like if you get to see them right after the next. And so you will be able to tell, and this is why I love watching the offensive lineman. You will be able to tell if his foot quickness is slower than his peers here. And if it is, well, then we might have an issue. And maybe it's not a big deal because obviously he's still going to be a better athlete than like a Dawan Jones, who is still a great pass protector because of his size and his length. And I think that could be the case for Mims as well. But it could kind of like dictate how high is the ceiling for him. Like, could he be just so freakish that you just don't really have a weakness, or is it like, yeah, you're gonna struggle sometimes against speed rushers that can kind of get low and dip around you. I really want to see what his kick slide looks like here.
Yeah, I agree with that because with him, if he can show that his kick slide is at least average or slightly above average for tackle in general, and he can play at that size, then the sky's kind of the limit for him. Whereas I think if it isn't as good, the question then becomes maybe does he need to lose a little bit of weight, like lose a little bit of that weight and size, and
Yeah.
lower that a little bit, which does maybe might impact him in the run game and some other things. So like I think if he can play at his size, if he weighs in at like the 340 range, which is what he was what he supposedly played at last year, then and he looks good in it, it kind of makes him a no-brainer for me, at least personally.
Yeah, I think so as well, especially if you look good in those drills. Then I think it'll put those questions to rest because he already graded out well. He didn't allow pressure. The sample size is really small.
Yes,
And so I do have to note here that if this is what I heard, if Mims gets drafted in the first round, he will have the fewest number of college snaps played of any player to ever be drafted in the first round. And so it's something to note at the very least, but the traits are just so exceptional here. And there's reason for that too. He was sitting behind other really good tackles there.
Exactly.
Other high recruits. Let's talk about Spencer Rattler here. This one's yours, Shane, so I'll let you hit it first.
Yeah, can Spencer Rattler stand out with the top quarterbacks not really probably expected to throw much at all, right, or do much of the drills? Like, he's the guy that I think can gain the most from the combine in terms of throwing on the field, interviews, teams getting their hands on him, testing. Like, if he tests well, which I think he will, I think he's a pretty good athlete, honestly, I really do. He could, like, to me, he's already kind of the very top of that, like, outside the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks. Like, he's the top of that list. But if he really stands out, if his arms stands out on the field, like I think guys are going to be talking about him more as like a potential, not just like early day 3 or late day 2, but maybe a relatively early day 2 pick even to the right team. So
yeah, and kudos to him for participating here because I mean, this is a guy who's obviously faced some adversity. He was number 1 quarterback recruit in the nation. He was lining up to be, it looked like that was going to be that first overall pick in the draft.
That type of player.
Loses his job to Caleb Williams after kind of a slump, has to transfer, goes to South Carolina, and then fights his way back to where last year he had a pretty solid season. And so I am intrigued by Rattler. But if he was 6'2", I'd be very intrigued by him. And coming over a little bit over 6 foot it's on the short side for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, you're always going to be at a slight disadvantage there, but I love his arm talent. I love the way he plays football. I love the way he hangs in the pocket, and he has enough escapability to make a lot of plays. So I agree. I'm interested to see him as well. Jackson Powers Johnson and his movement skills. This is one that I want to see as well, because being a huge guy, now he didn't do a lot of these that we were able to see at the Senior Bowl. We saw the one-on-one, the O-line versus D-line reps, which I think are very, very valuable, and he was awesome there. But how is he going to look in these movement drills compared to his interior offensive line peers, like compared to a Graham Barton and a Zach Frazier, like guys are a little bit lighter on their feet maybe than he is? Will it be a noticeable gap between the two? And if so, does that change Pittsburgh's thought process at all in terms of guys that they want for the wide zone?
Yeah, I think there's a chance that he looks a little bit less nimble than those guys because he's just a bigger player, but I don't think the difference is going to be that noticeable personally. I think he's going to look very, very good in these drills, and I think he's going to kind of show that like he is just one of those special prospects as far as center goes, where he can kind of play not just center but guard. He can do everything you ask of him, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of really hammers home that like he should be a top 25 pick or so.
Yeah, I think that he has a chance to solidify that here in Indianapolis. The next one is yours, Shane, Jaden Hicks.
Yeah, Jaden Hicks is a guy that I'm very interested in because I think that he could end up being a target for the Steelers because safety has been a major issue for us outside of Minka for the past couple of years. And really without Edmonds, especially last year. We can talk all we want about whether he was a good pick or not, which he really wasn't because the first round pick is very valuable. But he was a good player for us the past 2 years before last year. Like I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there's an interest in a reunion there, honestly, in the offseason.
There could be.
We'll talk about that later on. But I think Hicks is a guy that I like because he has a lot of box experience. He can play that box safety role, but I think he's a good enough athlete to kind of move around with Minka and let Minka kind of do some different things. But realistically, I want to see how he tests, and that's the whole thing here. Is if he tests well, that tells me okay, maybe he can play some deep safety more often and let Minka roam around, maybe take on different assignments, be more of a playmaker type, or is he just going to be really that type of box player? But I know a lot of people are pretty high on him. I think he's a really good tackler. I think he's going to be able to replicate a lot of what Edmonds did well, like covering tight ends, handling, kind of like that pseudo linebacker type of stuff. Very interested to see how he does in Indy. So.
Yeah, and I think Hicks took a big jump in 2023. He's only a redshirt sophomore. There's definitely some things to like there.
Yeah.
I still like, man, even going like the day 2 safety route, I still hesitate with that because there's so many safeties that float out there in free agency all the time. And then I think the question you got to ask is like, I know that Edmonds is not a spectacular football player, but is it a big enough upgrade from that to spend the draft capital on that when you can get Edmonds for essentially the veteran minimum? Like that type of question there. But I agree. I'm interested to see how he does as well. And maybe that'll be someone that's potentially on their radar here. What do we got next here? Nate Wiggins. This player could pair so perfectly with Joey Porter and what the Steelers want to do in terms of bump and run, man coverage stuff. There's a solid chance he goes above Pittsburgh's pick just because he is that height, weight, speed type of player where he's going to be the long-armed, fast guy. Like if he runs like a 4.42 and it comes in with like 33-inch arms, I mean, he was probably not there for pick 20, honestly. But I feel like though this potential pairing could make it really challenging for opposing quarterbacks where you can get up and jam these other receivers, give the pass rush some time to get home. I'm very intrigued by Nate Wiggins. I think in terms of just scheme fit, Shane, I think that he's probably the best overall cornerback the Steelers could have for the boundary cornerback to pair with Porter.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those guys for me that just feels like a Steelers corner for sure. Like I think Kool-Aid also fits that because of the press man ability and the smarts and everything, and you like that too. But Wiggins is definitely a better athlete, in my opinion, at least on tape.
Yeah, I think
so. If I'm not mistaken, I think Wiggins is one of the guys that I don't know if he specifically said this, but I've heard people say that he's trying to run in the 4.2s. Which, if he runs in the 4.2s, it's a whole different story. You're just at that point, like you're gonna go pretty early. But his arm length is gonna be interesting too because I think like just looking at him, it just feels like he's just long, strong. Like he's built a little bit wiry, like a 185 is what he was at. And I'd like to see him get up over 190. Definitely at his 6'2" frame if he is 6'2", but he's certainly a guy that's going to be fun to watch in Indy for sure.
Yeah, definitely interested to see where his measurables come in at because in some ways he could look like that Porter clone, like not as freakish when it comes to arm length.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get many guys that long as Joey, but we'll see.
That's definitely a name that will be on their radar. I'd have to imagine that maybe he's a guy that gets that trifecta, the boxes checked there as well. So I'll keep an eye on that. And then the very last thing, the thing that matters more than anything else, where is Mike Tomlin going to be? Where's Omar Khan going to be? Where are the eyes going to be watching? Because at the end of the day, we really had this narrowed down last year. And Shane, not just in the first round, but in the first couple days of the draft, we could really tell where the Steelers liked, which players they liked. And our estimates were extremely close. And we predicted some of these correctly. I think I had Broderick Jones going to the Steelers in my final mock right before the draft last year.
Yeah, I think both of us had like at least 3 or 4 players in our last couple that all went to the Steelers, and it's just like you could just tell, right? Like these are the type of players that they want, and you could tell based on the visits they had, and like you said about like who's paying attention to who. Like they're not very subtle, which is fine if you just get the guy you want anyway. But it's definitely going to be pretty easy to tell after by the time April is around. There's going to be a handful of guys that we can point at and go, okay, this could be the first round pick or the second round pick or. Like, and it's funny that it's that much of a kind of a easy science for the Steelers, but it is true, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, they show their hand. It's what they do. And so I think other teams do as well. Maybe not to the same extent, but I feel like everybody, if you dig deep enough, you can find their interests as well.
There's thresholds and stuff and trends everywhere, but we just notice the Steelers because that's what we do. So
absolutely. And so at next week at this time, Shane, we'll take a look at all those visits, all the ones that we have found out about that are floating out there. and we'll kind of break things down and maybe talk about the winners and losers. But I think that's going to do it for today's show. We ran a little bit long today. We go live every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So please come join us on the show. Thank you for joining us today. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shane Kubis. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jagai. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.